Picture this: October 25th, 1415, a muddy field in northern France. The air is thick with tension. On one side, King Henry V of England, leading a weary, outnumbered army of just 6,000 men. On the other, a massive, confident French force, numbering anywhere from 12,000 to a staggering 30,000 soldiers. The odds were impossible. The stage was set for a massacre. But what happened next wasn't a massacre, it was a miracle. This is the story of the Battle of Agincourt, a clash that would not only define a king and a nation but would also change the very art of warfare forever. How did this small band of brothers, tired and far from home, achieve one of the most astonishing victories in military history? Join us as we step back in time to uncover the strategy, the courage, and the sheer audacity behind the battle that proved 6,000 men could indeed change the world. To truly understand Agincourt, we have to rewind a bit. The year is 1415, and the 100 Years' War between England and France has been raging on and off for nearly 80 years. The young and ambitious King Henry V has revived an English claim to the French throne. He crosses the English Channel with his army, lays siege to the key port of Harfleur and succeeds, but at a heavy cost. His army is ravaged by disease and exhaustion. His original plan to march on Paris is now impossible. His only viable option is to march his troops north to the English-held port of Calais, a grueling 250-mile trek, to sail home before winter sets in. But the French aren't just going to let him walk away. They see a golden opportunity to crush the English invader once and for all. A huge French army, led by the Constable of France, Charles d'Albret, assembles to block Henry's path. They shadow the English army, forcing them away from the most direct route and deeper into hostile territory. Finally, near the small village of Agincourt, the French position themselves squarely in Henry's path to Calais. There is no escape. The English are trapped, exhausted, and outnumbered at least 2-1. For Henry and his men, the choice is stark: fight or surrender, and face certain death. As dawn broke on St. Crispin's Day, the two armies faced each other across a narrow, freshly plowed field, bordered by dense woods on either side. The ground was a quagmire, soaked by days of heavy rain. This terrain, which seemed like just another miserable feature of the French countryside, would become England's greatest ally. The French army was a spectacular sight: a sea of shining armor, fluttering banners, and noble knights eager for glory. Their strategy was classic medieval doctrine, a massive head-on cavalry charge to overwhelm the enemy line. They were so confident of victory that they reportedly brought carts to haul away the anticipated English prisoners for ransom. The English, in stark contrast, were a sorry-looking bunch. Many were sick, all were hungry, and their numbers were dwarfed. But they had two secret weapons: their king, Henry V, and the English longbow. Henry, a charismatic and battle-hardened commander, walked among his men, offering words of encouragement, famously reminding them that they were a band of brothers. His leadership instilled a desperate do-or-die resolve. And then there were the longbowmen, making up nearly 80% of his army. These were not knights, but common men, yeomen, who had trained with the powerful longbow since childhood. This weapon could unleash a storm of arrows with terrifying speed and accuracy. Henry's plan was brilliant in its simplicity, born of desperation and a keen understanding of his assets. He positioned his men-at-arms in a tight defensive line in the center, flanked on both sides by his thousands of archers. Crucially, he had the archers hammer long, sharpened wooden stakes into the ground in front of them, creating a deadly makeshift fence angled towards the enemy. This simple defensive measure was designed to impale the charging French horses, breaking their momentum and throwing their riders into chaos. With his army in place, Henry gave the order. The English advanced to within 300 yards of the French line, the maximum effective range of the longbow. And then they waited. The French, perhaps arrogant in their numbers, were slow to move. So Henry forced their hand. He ordered his archers to let loose. Imagine the sky turning dark as thousands upon thousands of arrows arced through the air. The sound would have been like a terrifying, deafening hiss. This was the signal. The first wave of French knights, packed tightly together on the narrow, muddy field, spurred their horses forward into a charge. It was exactly what Henry had anticipated. The charge was a disaster from the start. The muddy ground, churned into a thick, sticky bog, slowed the heavy war horses to a walk. As they struggled through the mire, they were met with a relentless storm of English arrows. Bodkin-tipped arrows designed to pierce armor rained down upon them. Horses wounded and panicked reared and threw their riders. The knights who did manage to reach the English lines were met by the wall of sharpened stakes, which impaled their mounts and created a horrific, tangled barrier of men and animals. The first French wave was completely broken, but the worst was yet to come. The second wave, composed of thousands of dismounted men-at-arms, began their slow, arduous advance on foot. Encased in heavy plate armor weighing up to 100 pounds, they sank into the mud with every step. Exhausted before they even reached the English, they were funneled into a tight, compressed mass by the terrain. They became a perfect target. The English archers, now firing into the flanks of this dense crowd, caused absolute carnage. Knights tripped over their fallen comrades, unable to get up in the mud under the weight of their own armor. The press of men from behind was so great that many were crushed or suffocated without even seeing an English soldier. When the French finally collided with the English line, they were exhausted, disorganized, and demoralized. The lightly armored English men-at-arms and even the archers, who had dropped their bows and picked up swords, axes, and mallets, waded into the fray. What followed was not a noble clash of knights but a brutal close-quarters slaughter. The agile English, unburdened by heavy armor, could move freely on the treacherous ground, cutting down the floundering French knights. The battle, which had started with a cavalry charge, had devolved into a muddy, desperate brawl. In a controversial and grim moment, Henry ordered the execution of many of the French prisoners taken in the initial fighting. He feared they might rearm themselves and attack his depleted forces from the rear, especially as a third French line still appeared to be a threat. It was a ruthless decision, but in the brutal calculus of medieval warfare, Henry saw it as a necessity for survival. Within just a few hours, the battle was over. The field was a scene of unimaginable horror. The French losses were catastrophic, with thousands dead, including much of the French nobility. The English, by contrast, had suffered astonishingly light casualties, perhaps only a few hundred. The victory at Agincourt was absolute, and its impact was immediate and profound. For England, it was a massive morale boost. The news of this impossible victory, of a small, sick army destroying the flower of French chivalry, was seen as a sign of God's favor. King Henry V was hailed as a national hero, his reputation as a brilliant military commander forever cemented. His Band of Brothers speech, later immortalized by Shakespeare, would become a cornerstone of English national identity and patriotic folklore. For France, Agincourt was a national catastrophe. The loss of so many high-ranking nobles created a power vacuum and plunged the country into even deeper political turmoil, crippling their ability to effectively resist the English invasion. The psychological blow was just as severe. Their military pride was shattered. How could their elite, armored knights, the pinnacle of medieval warfare, be so utterly decimated by an army of common archers? This question would lead to a fundamental shift in military thinking across Europe. Agincourt didn't just win a battle, it challenged an entire way of fighting. It demonstrated with brutal clarity that a disciplined force of well-trained infantry, armed with superior missile weapons and led by a smart commander, could defeat a larger, more traditional force of elite heavy cavalry. The age of the knight in shining armor was coming to an end, and the era of infantry dominance was beginning. The legacy of Agincourt echoes through the centuries. Militarily, it accelerated the decline of feudal cavalry and elevated the importance of trained infantry and ranged weaponry, a trend that would continue to shape the battlefields of the Renaissance and beyond. The battle proved that strategy, terrain, and technology could overcome brute force and superior numbers. Politically, the victory allowed Henry V to secure the Treaty of Troyes in 1420, which named him as the heir to the French throne. Although Henry died shortly after, and England would eventually lose the 100 Years' War, The impact of Agincourt on the English psyche was permanent. It became a powerful symbol of English resilience, the ultimate underdog story, where courage and determination triumphed against impossible odds. From the fields of France to the pages of Shakespeare, the story of Agincourt has inspired generations. It serves as a timeless reminder that history is not always made by the largest armies or the wealthiest nations. Sometimes, it is forged in the mud and rain by a few thousand determined souls who, against all odds, stand together and change the course of history forever. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey back to 1415. The Battle of Agincourt is a truly incredible story, and we've only scratched the surface. If you found this fascinating, please hit that like button and consider subscribing to our channel for more deep dives into the pivotal moments that shaped our world. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss an episode. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What part of the Agincourt story amazes you the most? Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Imagine this. It's October 25th, 1415. You're one of just 6,000 English soldiers, exhausted, hungry, and trapped deep in enemy territory. Blocking your path home is a colossal French army, perhaps 30,000 strong, gleaming in their heavy plate armor, confident of an easy victory. The odds aren't just bad, they're impossible. This was the scene on the morning of the Battle of Agincourt, one of the most legendary and improbable victories in military history. How did this band of brothers, led by the young King Henry V, manage to defy a force 5 times its size? The answer lies in a combination of brilliant tactics, revolutionary technology, and a little bit of mud. The English army was in a desperate situation. After a long and grueling campaign in France, they were trying to march to the safety of Calais, an English-held port. But the French, determined to crush the invaders once and for all, had cut them off. The chosen battlefield was a narrow stretch of freshly plowed farmland, hemmed in on both sides by dense woods. For the French, this seemed like the perfect place to trap and annihilate the English. For King Henry, it was a godsend. He understood that this terrain, this narrow funnel, was his greatest ally. It would prevent the massive French army from using its superior numbers to surround his small force. The key to Henry's plan was the English longbow. This wasn't just a bow, it was the superweapon of the Middle Ages. Standing 6 feet tall, it required immense strength to draw, but in the hands of a skilled archer, it could fire up to 12 arrows a minute over incredible distances. These arrows, tipped with sharpened steel points called bodkins, could punch through even the thickest plate armor. Henry positioned his men-at-arms in the center, a solid block of steel, but his real strength was on the flanks. He placed his thousands of longbowmen along the edges of the woods, protected by a line of sharpened stakes driven into the ground. A simple but ingenious defense against charging cavalry. As the morning mist began to clear, the French, resplendent on their war horses, grew impatient. Their knights and nobles, eager for glory and ransom, jostled for a position at the front. This arrogance would be their undoing. They launched their first charge, a thunderous wave of mounted knights, straight into the narrowest part of the field. And then, the sky went dark. A storm of arrows, tens of thousands of them, rained down from the English lines. The sound was said to be like a hailstorm on a slate roof. Horses screamed and fell, throwing their heavily armored riders into the thick, clinging mud. The French cavalry charge dissolved into a chaotic, struggling mass of men and animals, completely breaking its own momentum before it even reached the English lines. Seeing the cavalry falter, the main body of the French army, their knights and men-at-arms on foot, began their slow advance. But remember that terrain? The battlefield, already churned up by the horses, had become a quagmire. Each step was a struggle for the French knights, weighed down by 50 to 100 pounds of steel plate. As they trudged forward, exhausted and sinking into the mud, they were relentlessly peppered by the English longbowmen. The arrows found gaps in their armor, pierced visors, and brought down man after man. Those who did manage to reach the English line were exhausted and disorganized. They crashed into the steady English men-at-arms who, being more lightly armored, could move more freely on the treacherous ground. What followed was not a noble clash of swords, but a brutal, close-quarters struggle. The battlefield became a tangled heap of bodies. French knights who fell in the mud were often unable to get back up, and many suffocated or were trampled by their own comrades pressing from behind. The English archers, having spent their arrows, dropped their bows, drew their swords, daggers, and hatchets, and swarmed from the flanks into the struggling French ranks. Being unarmored, they were nimble and deadly, finishing off the trapped and exhausted knights. The French army, so confident just hours before, completely collapsed. The narrow field that was meant to be a trap for the English had become a death trap for the French, with their own numbers working against them, creating a fatal crush. The scale of the French defeat was staggering. While English losses were in the hundreds, the French lost thousands, including a huge portion of their nobility. Dukes, counts, and high-ranking commanders lay dead on the field. It was a catastrophic blow to the French leadership and morale, and it completely shifted the momentum of the 100 Years' War. For England, the victory was a shot of pure adrenaline. It cemented King Henry V's status as a legendary warrior king and created a powerful sense of national pride and identity that has echoed through the centuries. The legacy of Agincourt is immense. It was immortalized by William Shakespeare in his play, Henry V, with the famous St. Crispin's Day speech becoming a timeless call to courage against overwhelming odds. The battle demonstrated that a well-led, disciplined army with superior technology and tactics could defeat a much larger, but more poorly organized force. It marked the beginning of the end for the age of the heavily armored knight, and heralded the dominance of missile infantry on the European battlefield. The story of Agincourt is more than just a historical event. It's a powerful tale of how courage, ingenuity, and a refusal to surrender can turn certain defeat into a glorious victory. It reminds us that sometimes, the biggest army doesn't win the day. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back to 1415. If you enjoyed this story of incredible defiance, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history's most epic moments. Let me know in the comments what other battles you'd like to see covered. Until next time, stay curious. Picture this: October 25th, 1415. A cold, rainy morning in northern France. A small, exhausted, and sick English army stands against a massive, confident French force, outnumbering them perhaps 6-1. The stage is set for a massacre. Yet what unfolded was one of the most stunning underdog victories in military history: the Battle of Agincourt. How did this happen? The answer lies in one man, King Henry V, a leader whose decisiveness forged a legendary victory from the jaws of certain defeat. Today, we're diving deep into the story of how Henry V's brilliant leadership, tactical genius, and a little help from the weather led his band of brothers to glory. Before the first arrow was loosed, the battle was already being won in the hearts and minds of the English soldiers. Henry V wasn't a king who commanded from a gilded tent miles away. He was on the front lines, walking among his men, sharing their hardships, and speaking to them not as a monarch but as a fellow soldier. His famous pre-battle speech, immortalized by Shakespeare, captured this spirit perfectly. He spoke of honor, of brotherhood, and of a glory that would be remembered forever. He told them that any man who shed his blood with him that day would be his brother. This wasn't just empty rhetoric. It was a powerful promise that transformed a weary, outnumbered army into a cohesive, motivated force, ready to fight and die for their king and for each other. This personal connection and shared sense of purpose instilled a level of morale and confidence that no amount of French numbers could easily break. Now let's talk tactics. Henry V was not just a charismatic leader. He was a shrewd and experienced military commander. He knew he couldn't win a head-on clash of knights. His ace in the hole was the English and Welsh longbowmen, the medieval equivalent of a machine gun corps. These weren't just peasant levies. They were highly trained specialists who could unleash a devastating storm of arrows. Henry's entire strategy was built around maximizing their effectiveness. He chose his ground carefully, positioning his army in a narrow gap between two dense forests. This created a natural funnel, preventing the vast French army from using its superior numbers to outflank him. The French knights would have no choice but to charge straight into a prepared killing zone. This battlefield organization was a masterstroke of defensive warfare, turning the terrain itself into a weapon. And then there was the weather. Days of relentless rain had turned the battlefield into a thick, clinging mud pit. For the English, who were mostly lightly armored archers and dismounted men-at-arms, this was an inconvenience. But for the French, it was a catastrophe. Their knights were encased in heavy plate armor and their horses were just as burdened. As they charged across the field, they became bogged down in the quagmire. The mud sucked at their feet, exhausted their horses, and turned their glorious, thundering charge into a slow, stumbling, and chaotic slog. Each step was a struggle, making them perfect slow-moving targets for the English longbows. The environment that Henry had so astutely chosen amplified the power of his archers and crippled the greatest strength of his enemy. With the French advance in disarray, Henry V ordered his archers to unleash hell. Imagine the sky darkening with thousands of armor-piercing arrows, raining down on the struggling French knights. The sheer volume and velocity were terrifying. The arrows could punch through weaker points in their plate armor, and even when they didn't penetrate, the impact could knock a man off his feet, leaving him helpless in the mud. Once the French ranks were broken and in chaos, the English archers dropped their bows, picked up swords, axes, and mallets, and charged into the fray alongside their men-at-arms. They were mobile, unencumbered by heavy armor, and swarmed the exhausted, trapped French knights. It was brutal, close-quarters combat where English discipline and battlefield organization proved superior to the disorganized and panicked French nobility. The result was a victory of staggering proportions. While English losses were in the hundreds, the French suffered thousands of casualties, including a significant portion of their nobility. The Battle of Agincourt wasn't just a military victory, it was a political earthquake. It shattered the prestige of the French aristocracy and dramatically shifted the balance of power in the 100 Years' War. Henry III's triumph allowed him to press his claim to the French throne with renewed vigor, leading to the Treaty of Troyes, which briefly made him the heir to France. The legend of Agincourt echoed through the centuries, a testament to what decisive leadership, clever strategy, and a determined army can achieve against seemingly impossible odds. It cemented Henry IV's reputation as one of England's greatest warrior kings. So what can we take away from this incredible story? The victory at Agincourt was a perfect storm of factors, but at its heart was the decisive leadership of Henry V. He understood his army's strengths and his enemy's weaknesses. He chose the battlefield with intelligence, turning the environment into an ally. Most importantly, he inspired his men to believe in themselves and their cause, transforming fear into courage and desperation into a fierce determination to win. The tale of Henry V and his band of brothers at Agincourt remains a powerful lesson in leadership, showing how a clear vision and unwavering resolve can lead to glory, even when facing the most daunting of challenges. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back to the muddy fields of Agincourt. If you enjoyed this dive into military history, please hit that like button and consider subscribing for more stories of great battles and legendary leaders. Let me know in the comments what other historical events you'd like to see covered. Until next time, stay curious,